What do you get when you mix a cow's teat, bald men, turbans, Virginia Woolf, manure, the British Royal Navy, and one kooky dude? Well, the recipe for Great Britain's #1 practical joker, Horace de Vere Cole. Born in Ireland in 1881, he wreaked humorous havoc on several countries in Europe for several decades, and today we dive into his life and pranks. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. Horace de Vere Cole was born May 5th, 1881 in Ballincollig, County Cork, Ireland, when Ireland was a part of the United Kingdom. His father, William Udding Cole, was a major in the 3rd Dragoon Guards of the British Army. I didn't make that up. William's grandfather, who was Horace's great-grandfather, had made his fortune dealing in quinine, a medicine used to treat malaria. His mother, Mary de Vere, was literally only known because she was the niece and heiress of politician Sir Stephen de Vere, 4th Baronet. Basically, the de Vere family claimed to be important because their family was important, which sounds like Europe in a nutshell. Horace had a sister, Annie, who would go on to marry future British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Spoiler alert, but Neville would later say this about Horace, quote, "I was obliged to say what I did think, but fortunately it appeared that was Annie's opinion too, and she was not at all inclined to be proud of her brother's exploit. I think he must be a little mad," end quote. Here we go. Horace also had a half-sister on his mom's side, Mary, who's only worth remembering because she was a society beauty who married another important British man, this time a diplomat. I'm not going to name him, well, because it was annoying how difficult the treasure hunt was to find his sisters, literally just their names. Maybe the women should be named sometimes and not just the men. Maybe, probably not. When Horace was a young boy, his father died in India of cholera. Cholera is a bacterial infection that primarily affects the small intestine. The main symptoms include severe diarrhea and vomiting, which can lead to dehydration. Cholera is often spread through contaminated water or food. Evidently, the cholera pandemics that hit India in the 19th century were just brutal. They killed 38 million people in India in a century, including William Cole, Horace's dad. When Horace was 10, he contracted diphtheria. Y'all, I don't know why, but this episode sent me down rabbit holes of illnesses we always talk about, but I at least don't really know what they mean. So I did a lot of random research. Sometimes I assume it's a stomach thing, but it's not. I don't know. Anyway, diphtheria is not a stomach thing. It's a bacterial infection that mostly affects the respiratory system, causing symptoms such as a sore throat, fever, and difficulty breathing. Horace survived, but the disease affected his hearing for the rest of his life. Horace was sent to boarding school at Eton College for his middle and high school years. Maybe his family was tired of his antics and just decided to send him away. They were hoping it would quench his mischievous nature, maybe? I don't know. I'm not really sure. I don't know about you, but the only reason I even know about Eton College is because Prince William and Prince Harry went to Eton, and I was bound and determined to marry Prince Harry when I was 13 years old. But just so you know, Eton College has a long history, apparently, of educating members of the royal family and, in general, just like great aristocracy in Europe and England. It is considered a very prestigious school with close ties to the British upper class. And yes, if you're wondering, I did fall into yet another, well, this time it was an Eton rabbit hole. And I learned, among other things, Etonites, current and former, are really into a weird game called the Eton Wall game. That is, you guessed it, played against a wall. But that wall was built in 1717. According to a year 13 student Thomas, quote, "The wall game is a quintessentially Eton sport, resembling elements of both football and rugby, despite at times looking like no other imaginable game. It is believed that the wall game was invented by errant king's scholars, pupils who live in college, bored by lessons and wishing to find a new way to spend their limited free time," end quote. So they kicked the ball against the wall. Anyway, it's fine. hope they have fun. As a plucky 18-year-old, and more on his pluckiness later, Horace was commissioned as a lieutenant in the, and I am not making this up, Yorkshire Hussars. He rose to the rank of acting captain before being wounded by a, and yes, I'm not making this up either, dum-dum bullet in July of 1900. He was discharged and he donated his entire £1,800 disability pension to the War Widows and Orphans Fund. Okay, so I know I always figure out the conversion from whatever dollars to modern dollars because I'm into it. Maybe y'all are into it and maybe you aren't. But this pension, y'all, was the equivalent of $293,667.13 in modern 2024 dollars. Imagine being that rich that you can just give that much money away when you're 18. I can only dream of that kind of money. Anyway, Horace started college at Trinity College at Cambridge in 1902. He would not complete his formal degree, but he would earn his degree in prankery for sure. For his first prank that we know about, at least that was worthy enough of documenting, and I have to say that based on the lengths they went to for this prank, it can't possibly have been his first prank. But Horace grabbed his buddy Adrian Stephen, who just so happens to be the brother of author Virginia Woolf. According to Horace's biographer, Martin Downer, Stephen was the, quote, perfect foil for Horace, someone sympathetic and encouraging, yet unafraid to take him on, end quote. Evidently, in early 1905, Horace found out that the 8th Sultan of Zanzibar was visiting England. Horace plotted to fake a state visit of the Sultan to Cambridge. They drafted and sent a telegram on March 2nd to Cambridge's mayor saying, quote, the Sultan of Zanzibar will arrive today at Cambridge at 4:27 for a short visit. Could you arrange to show him buildings of interest and send carriage? Henry Lucas, Hotel Cecil, London, end quote. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you may have gathered that Horace doesn't exactly have the same skin tone as the Sultan. And so, well, they decided to use a technique which allows you to darken your skin to appear to be a different race. I am not going to use the word because I don't want to go to content jail, but you know what I mean? Yeah, that super terrible and racist thing. Yeah, they did it. And also, have you seen pictures of people who have tried this similar technique? Well, I can't imagine it was very convincing. And in fact, there's photographic evidence of this prank, which I'm showing right now if you're watching. And the guy right in the middle is Horace. It's not the worst attempt at that particular terrible and awful, super racist technique, but it's not super convincing, at least in my opinion. I will say that the Sultan's image had been printed in the newspapers at the time, and so they decided that Horace would impersonate the Sultan's uncle instead of the actual Sultan. And yeah. Horace, Stephen, and a couple of their friends went to London where they got robes and turbans from a costume shop and then took a train back to Cambridge where on March 2nd, they were gathered up by a luxury carriage and taken to be warmly welcomed by the mayor himself and the town clerk. The party was then escorted on a tour of the city and also to the university where those guys were actually students. Some of their classmates were introduced to them throughout the tour, and they weren't even recognized by their friends. Unfortunately, they didn't really have an exit strategy for their stunt. They asked to be dropped at the train station after an hour, but they suddenly realized that if they took the train back to London and then had to turn around and come right back to Cambridge, they were likely to miss their 10 p.m. college curfew. But they were surrounded by well-wishers, so they couldn't just not get on the train. So they literally just ran away. They hiked up their robes and sprinted off the train platform, grabbing the first taxi, and had the driver take them as far as they could with the money they had in their pockets. Then they managed to get to a friend's house, had a bath, had some dinner and a drink, and headed back before curfew. And it's possible the drink they mixed up was one of my favorites, a whiskey sour smash. The first mention of this drink was in The Bartender's Guide by Jerry Thomas, which turns out to be the first drink book ever published in the United States. However, this was a sailor's drink, made to both get you drunk and keep you from getting scurvy. And Irish whiskey is, well, Irish. So the odds are pretty good that an Irish whiskey sour was on the menu that night. To make your Irish whiskey smash sour, you'll need to take 2 parts Irish whiskey, 3/4 part lemon juice, 3/4 part simple syrup, an egg white, and 3 dashes of bitters, and add that all to a shaker with ice. Shake it really well so that you get that egg white nice and frothy, and of course you combine and chill all of the ingredients along the way. Strain into a glass with fresh ice, and if you want, garnish with a lemon twist. For the mocktail, take 2 parts non-alcoholic whiskey, 3/4 part lemon juice, 3/4 part simple syrup, an egg white, and 3 dashes of bitters. If you want, you can omit those if you don't want. Add those to your shaker, shake, 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 strain, 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 and sip up as you bask in the glory of your well-executed, super random prank. Soon after the boys quit drinking and made it home, the Daily Mail ran an article about some strange East African royals who, after a state visit, all of a sudden started speaking like regular everyday English and ran off, never to be seen again. Horace, never one to be quiet about his successful stunts, went to the Daily Mail himself to give an interview. So by March 4th, the secret was already out. Several other newspapers reprinted the story, including the St. James Gazette, who called it a, quote, most audacious practical joke, end quote. The rather embarrassed mayor wanted Horace and his friends expelled, but was persuaded by college officials that it would only damage his reputation more. Yeah, because everyone loves a good practical joke. Mr. Mayor, come on! It turns out that this prank was just a warm-up for a much bigger adventure that would happen a few years later when Britain and Germany were in an arms race, which would eventually turn into a full-blown war. The British Navy launched the Dreadnought in 1906. It was a huge, fast, and heavily armed ship that changed the way sea battles were fought. People around the world talked about how powerful this ship was, and people at home talked about how much it cost. In 1910, Horace gathered a group of his friends, including Stephen and Virginia Woolf herself. After, according to Virginia, one of their friends went to Horace and said that the Royal Navy needed, quote, taking down a bit, end quote. Horace sent a wire to the Admiralty as a member of the Foreign Office to say that the Emperor of Abyssinia would soon be there to check out the home fleet. Virginia, Stephen, and a few others were dressed up in, well, the thing we talked about before, and beards. If you're watching, then Virginia is actually the one seated on the far left. Stephen, who would be the interpreter, learned a few words of Swahili from a missionary grammar book on the way down. Every African language sounds the same, right? Insert inaudible eye roll here. Horace and his group were met by members of the Royal Navy, including Virginia and Stephen's cousin, who graciously showed them all around the Dreadnought, paying particular attention to the new features of the fancy ship. By this point, Stephen had completely forgotten all of his Swahili phrases, and he was just muttering just pieces of Greek and Latin from his very complete, evidently, Cambridge education. No one was any the wiser, including their cousin. Stephen declined for the group to stay for lunch because, according to him, the religious beliefs of Abyssinia made it impossible for the royal family to touch food unless it was prepared in quite special ways. But according to reality, eating would have messed up their makeup and given them away. A few weeks later, the prank was uncovered, and Horace sent a photo of the princes, that photo we saw earlier, to the Daily Mirror. The Royal Navy had a lot of egg on their face and demanded that Horace be arrested, but they hadn't broken any laws. The men of the group, however, did get an unofficial flogging by junior Royal Navy officers. So there's a lot more stories about Horace's pranks. I'm going to rapid fire a few of my favorites. He was a prankster his whole life. His goal was typically to make pompous Richie Riches look silly. I mean, eat the rich, or at least embarrass them, am I right? One of my favorites was when he challenged his old classmate from Eton, Oliver Locker Lampson, to race him on a London street to the nearest corner. Oliver was actually a newly elected member of Parliament by that point. Horace gave Oliver a generous 10-yard head start, but had also slipped a gold watch into Oliver's pocket. While Oliver was running at full speed, Horace shouted, "Stop, thief," to a passing policeman. Oliver was promptly arrested, but then Horace, after waiting a few minutes to snicker behind his hand, explained it was all a joke, and the policeman sent them on their way. Horace then started directing an imaginary band with a stick he'd found on the ground, and the policeman, probably annoyed about the whole affair, used that as a reason actually to arrest Horace, who would eventually be found guilty of breach of the peace and fined a whopping $624 fine, which I guess wasn't that big of a deal for his pocketbook and worth it to embarrass a member of parliament. In 1910, he faked his car breaking down in the middle of the busiest traffic area in Paris, and he laid down underneath his car, pretending to fix it for 30 minutes because he'd made a bet with his friends that he could lie on his back for 30 minutes in this exact spot and get away with it. Oh, this one's a little dirty. Sometimes Horace would wander the streets with a cow's teat sticking out of his pants. He would wait until everyone around him was just angry or shocked enough, and then he would pull a pair of scissors out of his pocket and cut off the cow teat. Yeah. In his non-pranking life, Horace fell in love with an 18-year-old Irish heiress named Denise Lynch in 1918 when he was 37. They were married in Dublin on September 30th, 1918, and on his honeymoon on April Fool's Day, 1919, he dropped horse manure onto Venice's Piazza San Marco, a city with no horses that could be reached only by boat. Oh, that's so romantic for your honeymoon. Another story goes that he once hosted a party for some of the elite in London, and throughout the evening, of course, people introduced themselves to one another, only to discover that every single one of them had the last name or part of their last name was Bottom. My favorite is probably the time that he bought tickets for particular seats in the bottom part of a theater for a play he thought was pretentious. And he distributed those tickets to bald men whose heads, painted with a single letter, either spelled out the word bollocks or potentially the F word, which you could read from the seats that were above them. That's a pretty good joke. Horace never faced the same success personally as he did in his pranking life. He lost basically his entire fortune in Canadian land speculation and voluntarily exiled himself to France. He and Denise divorced in 1928 after they had a daughter named Valerie. Horace married his second wife, Mabel Wright, in 1931. She would have a son, Tristan de Vere Cole, who turned out to actually be the son of artist Augustus John, who she was having an affair with. Horace de Vere Cole died in Paris on February 25th, 1936, at age 54 after a heart attack. Tristan de Vere Cole would go on to be an officer in the Royal Navy, ironically, and then a television director, and he is now 88 years old and retired. Naturally, we know nothing about Horace's actual blood daughter, and I think we know why. She's a woman. Horace de Vere Cole would eventually claim responsibility for over 100 pranks, giving him the nickname the patron saint of April Fool's Day. It might be worth mentioning that one of the hoaxes he was accused of, he did not commit. The Piltdown Man. Throwback to season 3, anybody? I'm surprised he was even considered a suspect, because Horace was he just did his pranks and then interviewed with the newspaper. So he never did his pranks in secret. Of all of my favorite things written about Horace, it might be this. The Dictionary of National Biography wrote that Horace's, quote, advanced deafness prevented him from realizing that his carefully timed coughing was inadequate to cover his explosive breaking of wind, end quote. Thanks for hanging out with me. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been trying to more seamlessly weave the drinks into the episodes, trying to find a part of the story that thematically makes sense, also with a time to drink a drink that thematically makes sense. I know that some of you skip the drink making part of the episode, so let me know if that makes it too annoying or hard to do, or you don't like it, or heck, if you'd rather the drink making part of the episodes went away. I mean, it might, it's half of the podcast title, but whatever, give me your opinion either way. Hate watch a few times while you're at it. Next week, a well-named pair of bank burglars and a matching red drink. You know where to find me. capersandcocktails.com will get you there, no matter how you consume your true crime media. I'll see you next week, and remember, there is nothing wrong with pranking British snobby snobs.